thinking about how many of those organizations recognized how they had become too reliant on one source of funding and
Yeah.
quickly had to figure out how to diversify, because exactly as you said, the foundation that had, really given to the arts said, oh my gosh, the community need is now health.
Hello, hello, hello. It's Holly Rustick here with Grant Writing and Funding, and I'm so excited to bring Mike Chamberlain, the Executive Director of the Grant Professionals Association, GPA, back on the podcast. I think 2020, 2021, somewhere around there, you were on the podcast. It's been a while.
I was going to say it's been several years now, so excited to be back.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming back on. I was like, oh my gosh, it's been too long. Let's get you back on. I know a lot of our members in the Academy, they're also inside GPA. So this is really good to be able to connect them, or a lot of them have questions about it too. So definitely want to break down like what GPA is. But I also want to dive deeper, since you work with thousands of grant professionals, like what's going on? Like, what is the state of the grant professionals in 2025? There's a lot going on with grants, as we both know, but how are we seeing grant professionals respond? What are the resources that we're seeing them kind of tune into? What are they doing? And all of the good things. You have a conference. We're going to talk about a lot. So let's start with kind of rewind, just so the base level of people out there who might not be familiar with GPA. Can you talk about what it is exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Grant Professionals Association is a membership organization. It's a membership association for grant professionals. So those who work with both pre-award and post-award grants. So whether you're writing grant proposals, doing grant research, or managing post-award, that you're managing the grant as it comes in after the organization got it and you're preparing all the reports, or if you, like many, are doing all of it. You've got the full life cycle of the grant, from doing that original research to writing that final closeout report and telling the funder exactly where all the last penny was spent. So we're here for you. And so as we look at it, our mission is to support grant professionals through advocacy, community, and professionalism. Advocating for the grant profession, advocating for you as grant professionals. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of a couple of specific things we're doing this year. The community is really about building the community of grant professionals. And, Holly, you've got a great group that's a community as well. And so one of the things that we so often know is that as grant professionals, oftentimes you are the only person who does grants for your organization, and you're the only one who understands the language and the acronyms and knows what a NOFO is, and can speak that language. And so sometimes it can be hard in your own organization to not have somebody to come and talk to. And that's where GPA plays a role in building powerful connections and community. Whether that's through our online private community called Grant Zone, where you can come and ask a question, and you're getting an answer from your fellow grant professional. And it's really one of our best benefits that people talk about, is to be able to have access to over 4,000 grant professionals, some of whom may have done exactly what you're trying to do and may have great advice for you. And then the last area is professionalism. And, Holly, this kind of ties into the work you do as well in terms of training folks in the field. As of right now, there's very little in terms of formal education for grant professionals. Many people land in the field coming from social work, from a journalism background, communications, any number of different fields. And so one of the things that we pride ourselves on is providing that next level of education. We don't provide the introductory course because there's a lot of people that do that, but we're there to work with folks on their continuing professional development. What are the specialty things that they need that, maybe they started out doing all the pre-award stuff and now all of a sudden they're charged with doing post-award grant management and reporting, and never had that challenge before. And so they can come to GPA and find some of those resources for education and professional development. And lastly, within the professionalism piece, the world is constantly changing, as we've all seen and know. And so one of the things that I think is super important is that as a professional, you're constantly learning and growing in your profession, in your craft. And then I think that underlying all of that are what we kind of call our cross-cutting priorities. which are ethics, sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and responsible transparency. And I bring those up because, again, those are core pieces for us, but I bring those up because one of the key pieces to GPA is our code of ethics.
Yeah.
And one of the things that
Which we refer people to a lot, by the way. Yeah.
well, and we appreciate that, because one of the
Mhm.
things that, and so many of our members love having that, because when the, program manager or an executive director says, "Oh, let's just go do this with the grant funds," um, having that resource and having that professional association code of ethics in front of them to say, nope, sorry, we're not going to do that. We are going to spend the grant funds the way they were intended. I'm going to
Yeah.
represent my organization in the way it was intended, so
Yeah.
that we are being honest and truthful in how we're presenting ourselves and our programs. And so that when we get that funding, we're doing the right things with it. And so
Right.
it becomes that benchmark and standard that really can help folks with that.
Yeah. And we love it so much too, because like you said, it's also helpful if it kind of reminds me of like even just being the next level, like as a consultant, right? So like as a grant consultant, the executive director kind of listens to you a little bit more than they would if you were a grant writer as a staff member, right? There's just something nuanced about it, but it's there. So even it gives that next level of like, okay, now you might not be listening to me as a consultant, but let me give you this other thing, these best practices, right? That are like from this established organization. And they're like, oh, so it's kind of like this next level of credibility and validity that you can pull in as a consultant or even as a staff grant writer to then validate your reasons, because they might be like, oh, that's nice that and cute that you say that, but really our board wants to do this. And then you can be like, oh, it's not just me. It's not just me saying it, right? Like it's there's credibility behind it. Here it is. Like a lot of people just put the link on their website. I love seeing that. A lot of the people in our programs, that's what they like to do. Just to say these are the code of ethics that I follow. One of the biggest things, not only like what you were talking about the example, but the example that we use a lot for that is when people have can you work on commission? So we love that
So
you break that down and like you cannot. And that's been one of the easiest things. I'm like, just throw that in, just link it to the GPA Code of Ethics. And they do. And then they can overcome that objection or just like, like get it up, course correct people real quick without having to be like, but it's just my opinion. They're like, no, but this credible, right? So thank you for having that. It's been so helpful.
yeah, and I think one thing you said, and whether it's on their website, I know that some consultants will even do that kind of as a part of their introductory package.
Yep.
They'll
Yep.
put it right there with their information about here's what my services are that I offer.
Yep.
And oh, by the way, I abide by the GPA Code of Ethics, and here's a copy of it so you can know exactly what you're
Yep.
getting when you're working with me.
Yeah, we say put it right in your FAQs, in your proposal, and on your website. Absolutely. Just break it down, get in front of it, get in front of that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like,
And you're,
that's, yeah. Go ahead, good.
no, and you're absolutely right. And it's great to hear that you, again, the compensation piece, it's one that it doesn't come up quite as often, but when it does, it's really nice to be able to refer to that and say, no, that's not the way to do it. Grant
Yeah.
professionals, I always make the argument that grant professionals deserve to be paid for their work and time. That's all there
Yeah.
is to it.
Yeah. And it's great. And I have like a lot of videos on that because we do talk about, because as consultants, you get that question a lot. Oh,
Yeah.
especially from new organizations. Can't you just work on commission? Because they feel like, oh, it's a win-win thing. And it's like this big urban myth. So we like really break it down. But every time and I've done so many YouTube episodes, podcasts, articles about this, because it's something that always comes up, is I always refer to you guys. I'm like, just one of the ways you can do it. I give them 4 steps. And I say one of them is you say it's against best practices, and you can look at GPA standards of the Code of Ethics. So, it's such a good resource that I think is really out there in the world from you all. So I
Great.
appreciate that so much.
Well,
Yeah.
great. We appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I love, so you're really looking at these different ways of, like you said, advocating, providing resources, the professionalism, like in your program. And I know another thing that you didn't mention, so I just want to make sure, I believe you still have it because people are still talking about it, is also when you become a member, you get access to GrantStation. Is that still ongoing? Yeah.
Yes.
And that's a research platform to find grants, just for those of you who might be listening, because we talk about the different research platforms. So I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's such a good benefit. Like it's such a good benefit to have. So can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so it is part of your membership. It's your account with GrantStation, and I will tell you, GrantStation, if you haven't visited them lately, you need to. They've made some major upgrades to their search engine, and
Good.
they're making some changes, good positive changes to their platform. And they're not just U.S. based grants; they do a
Yeah.
really nice job with international grants, and even in that category of international is Canadian as well. But they've really grown their database, especially on the international side of things, and so it's a great tool. Like you said, it comes with GPA membership. And the other thing to share with you that comes with GPA membership, we mentioned professionalism. You get all of our webinars for free. That is part
Nice.
of the GPA. So if it's a GPA produced webinar, now some of our special events that doesn't count, but our
Right.
regular monthly webinar content is part of your membership as well. So
Nice.
yeah, between GrantStation and the free education piece, it's a quick win-win for most folks.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of people like that. And I love Yvonne, she's inside our programs, and she's one of our co-coaches in our academy too. And she's the president, I believe, of the Chicago chapter for GPA.
Oh, okay.
And she was saying, yeah. And she was like, she always says that whenever people are like, especially looking for international grants, they're like, where do I find a good resource? And she's like, GrantStation is like the best for international grants. So always pulling that into, because like as you mentioned, they've intentionally built that out, thinking about that. There's the gap, right? That's the gap. So I believe that they're one of the ones up there that are really addressing that, as you mentioned. So
Yeah.
for those of you looking for grants, it's a hard thing, right? Not all grant software has that capability, but if you are writing for international clients, that's a place for you to definitely check out. Yeah, and then if you're already looking at being a GPA member, like you mentioned, like that's something to consider. Yeah. So because I just want to throw that in there because you didn't.
Yeah.
So that's a
No,
big
thank
thing.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those things that I kind of because I'm
Yeah.
so in it so often. That's a great one to remember because it between honestly between Grant Zone, the private online community, and GrantStation, those are probably two biggest benefits that people talk about the most as far as the value that they get from GPA.
Yeah. And I mean, I can speak for that too. Like we have a daily Slack channel, which is similar to your grant zone in a way where people can go any day. You can ask a question, you can get feedback, you can get templates like, hey, do you have this? Hey, do you have that? Hey, hiring people. And they're like, it's all the things. So I know grant zone is very similar. So good. Another thing I wanted to talk about then is really looking at, some of the things that you're doing. So let's talk. I know behind the green room, we were talking about one of the things, and I wanted to make sure we brought it up was the advocacy piece. So, and as we're going, and then we're going to talk about 2025 stuff, y'all. Don't worry, we'll get there. But like in the advocacy piece, as far as like things you're doing, because it's really exciting. Can you tell me about what you're doing for like the job description? Like as you mentioned, like I'll let you explain it.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things we learned over the last 5 to 7 years as we were doing some research is we found out that the occupation of grant professional didn't exist in any government reports or any government reporting. So we started digging into it, and found out there's this wonderful thing called the Standard Occupation Classification, wherein all the occupations are classified. Except for grant professional, there's no classification for it. And so the
And
interesting
it's just
thing,
not listed, right? It's just not there. It's
it's
like
just not
just
there.
yeah.
So people have said, well, it falls under technical writer, but that really doesn't categorize what grant professionals do, and there's a whole lot of nuance to it.
Mhm.
And so one of the other things we learned is the standard occupation classification is up for review once every 10 years. So
Oh.
we missed the last window like by 3 months. So
Oh
we
no.
were like,
When was it? When was the
um,
last time?
so I'm trying to remember the cycle now. So 28. So it was 2018. is
Okay.
when it
So
was
it's
last.
coming up to 2028 in a few
So it's
years,
coming
right
right.
around the corner.
And so what we then learned was that there's this whole review and development cycle that it goes through that is
Okay.
actually published in 2028.
Ah, I got you. Got you. Okay.
So we started watching, and so we started doing work to
Mhm.
research and develop actual job descriptions for grant professionals, and several different levels of them. And we've been watching the Federal Register, watching closely to see when it was going to be reopened. And last summer, we saw the Federal Register notice that there was a 30-day window to submit any new or updates to the standard occupation classification. And so, fortunately, we had done all our research, built all of our information out, and submitted our materials last summer. So
Okay.
that's the good news. The
Mhm.
next part of this process is basically about a 3-year process by which the Standard Occupation Classification Committee reviews all of this information and data that we've provided, and asks for additional data. And then they actually update and publish in the Federal Register about a year out. So sometime in probably 2026. So that's based on what we think right now. Um, they will publish in the Federal Register. Here's what occupations we are going to add to the standard occupation
Mm.
classification. So in the
Okay.
meantime, that's what we're working on, is making sure that we're gathering more data to reinforce our position, and to, again, recognize the work that grant professionals are doing and making sure they have a definition for their occupation, because that's what drives a lot of federal data gathering. So some people might have heard of the Occupational Outlook Handbook. That is
Mhm.
a federal publication that's done every year that talks about what jobs are coming available and what salary levels are and what are the outlooks for that job into the future. Um,
Mhm.
so being able to build that up is to get that into, the way I look at it, getting that occupation into the federal system helps the federal government drive some of the data collection that we may not be able to do as a smaller association. Uh,
Right.
and so at the same time, it then gathers and supports that information for grant professionals.
Yeah.
And so, what's been really exciting for us out of that, then, and because we had to do this work for the occupation system, we are now going to turn that work into some standard job descriptions. And so that, as people come into the field or they get their first job, they have something to rely upon. Or, say, a municipality is looking to hire a grant pro, they can come to us and say, what's a job description look like? What's the salary range for hiring
Mhm.
somebody for that position if they need to hire somebody internally? So that we can provide that information. And so not only can the individual who's applying for the job have information and be able to advocate for themselves about what their
Mhm.
job is and what it isn't,
Right.
um,
Mhm. Yeah.
and also what a good salary would be for that position. So that's one of the advocacy pieces for us, is being able to give grant professionals the tools to be able to advocate for themselves.
Right. I think that's so good. And and like as I mentioned before too, like when we saw that on a local level, when we were advocating for different, and this was for a grant I was working on and for a client, and it was about getting peer recovery support specialists also into the job descriptions and into the classification systems of the local government. Once we could do that, then they could be paid out from the grant because it's all in the system, and then it recognizes and procurement and all of the things and
Yep.
all of the things, just it mitigates everything.
Yeah.
So I loved when you mentioned, oh yeah, at the federal level, because lots of states can copy that then, right? It's easier
Yes.
to integrate.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And like I said,
Hmm.
that's why we're really trying to do some of this work ahead of time, even before the official federal recognition, but to be able to give even states those tools to say, here's a good job description that you can use and start
Yeah.
developing in at the state level, or even at the and one of the things we want to do is try to get it out into the general nonprofit world as well, so that they understand that as well. And
Yeah.
you mentioned, we were talking earlier about the code of ethics. To me, these are a couple things that go hand in hand. That
Oh,
being able to say to an employer, I have a code of ethics, and I have an organization that's helped write a job description, because so many
yeah.
times it's a little bit of made up by the
Hmm.
organization because they just don't know about grants. And
Yeah.
so this is one of those pieces where the grant pro can come in and say, I can help you with this. I can help you understand what my job is, and where I can be, where I can bring value to the organization, and what it is that I'm going to do to help support the organization reach its mission and serve its
Yeah.
clientele.
And I love that so much. And just like a little bit of so you also mentioned pricing with it. Like you guys have done your surveys, you kind of understand like different prices. But I also know in your surveys, because I like to be a part of them and to look at them, is to also see that pricing for grant professionals varies based on geographic areas, on experience, like all of the things. So you mentioned that we also give suggestions on pricing, how much to pay a grant professional. But is that a staff grant professional? Will that be confusing with a grant consultant, which would be very different in pricing and all of that? Would that, you know what I mean? Do you also see that there's some, things to watch out for with that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things, so we do publish, one of the other things that we do publish on an annual basis is our salary and benefits survey. And we've partnered with an outside agency to help us do that reporting, to really be able to give a lot more detail. And what's been great about that is they've been able to, as we've expanded that survey and get more participants in it, they're
Mhm.
able to give even better breakdowns in detail. So in some cases where we have enough data points, we can say for a state, for a particular job type, here's the salary range, which is
Yeah, nice.
incredibly helpful
Yeah.
for
What about at the
individuals.
federal level, though? Is that confusing at the federal level to give monetary recommendations because of
No,
that?
because I think, again, because it is a broad range, and this is I think this is the interesting part of this, is once you get the job in the occupation in the system, then the
Mhm.
federal government takes over in terms of doing some of those data
I see. I got
on
you to come
data
up with that.
collection from the
Yeah.
Department of Labor in terms of salary breakdown. We would still
Okay.
continue to do ours, because I
Yeah.
think ours will be a little more refined, but they're going to do it from a federal level. You're exactly right. And so they're going to do it by census regions and things like that.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Well, that can get confusing because I do see sometimes what they because you publish these. So what happens sometimes is like they'll catch like a little like a blog or a synopsis of what you wrote or a graphic, and they'll be like, oh, so if they're talking to a consultant, they're like they just see the staff writer though average, and they say we'll pay you that, and they're like, oh, that's not quite the same. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you that's one of the things that we've developed as a part of that survey, is a section for consultants, so that we don't recommend a certain price, but we can share with you what averages are and what averages are
Right.
for region. And one of the things that we're looking to do is to enhance that portion of the survey, um, because one of the things that we certainly know is the consulting, um, the field of grant professional consultants has grown dramatically. And so
Yeah.
we're trying to get better data points on that. And
Mhm.
so there's some challenges with that in terms of how do
Right.
you consider yourself a consultant, because there are a bunch of folks that are part-time consultants,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
which is great because there's continuing need for that. But trying to balance that out and help people understand, um, what is appropriate and what's a good range for that. Um, one of the things that, and I hear this from well-established consultants, but I also hear it from others too. So too often, grant professionals um, undervalue themselves. Um,
Yeah.
they, you know,
Yeah.
oh, I can do that and throw out this
Yeah.
low number. And one of the things that I try to reinforce with most grant professionals is you bring a unique skill set to this position. you bring a different perspective than the executive director, than the
Mhm.
finance person, than the program manager. And there's great value in what you're bringing to the table and what you can do to support the organization as it moves forward.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, and I love that you mentioned that too, because even that's what we say is like, yeah, you can look at those reports, but as you mentioned, it's what people report on what they charge and how knowledgeable are they in pricing and how much are they actually undervaluing. So sometimes I say you can look at these types of reports, but don't like just say, oh, on average, we saw the GPA report and consultants are saying they charge $50 an hour. And I'm like, they might not even know how to do pricing though.
Yeah.
Those people who are submitting so you can't that can't be like the bottom, like it can't be like like the golden thing to do, right? Like I'm going to base everything on that. I'm like, yes, it's good information to have and to process, but you can't just like make put all your cards in there, you know what I mean? So do you also see people, do you give that recommendation as well for pricing?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Because again, like I said, your expertise and what you're bringing to the table as a part of that work. Now, for some folks that say, all I want to do is write your grant proposal, and I'm going to charge you, but just using your example, $50 an hour or whatever the case may be, maybe that is appropriate. But if you're bringing so much more to the table in terms of researching opportunities and helping to craft a narrative and
Mhm.
helping them really pull things together, and this is one of the things I've often said, if I ever walked into an organization and wanted to know everything about the organization, I would ask them to point me to their grant professional,
Yep.
because the grant pro is going to know everything. They're
Yep.
going to know who the executive director and board is. They're going to know what the governance is.
Yep.
They're going to know about the mission of the organization. What are their core values? They're going to know the program staff and what programs they run, because that's core of what you're doing. They're going to understand the finances of the organization, because that all plays into how things go together. And they're going to, if you have a development staff, they're going to know what the development staff is doing to support things from a fundraising perspective. So I can,
Mhm.
in a 20-minute conversation with a grant professional, I can probably learn about 90% of what's going on within an organization. And so
Absolutely. Yeah.
that you truly are a linchpin to the organization in helping them secure the funding that's going to make a difference for the people they're serving.